doesn't expect an answer. The Pope also saying that Hungary's prime minister has told him that Russia intends to end the war next week. A senior U.S. official says they expect Russia to eventually declare they've annexed large portions of eastern Ukraine. Some of the people holed up beneath a bombed-out steel mill in Mariupol have been evacuated.
Dozens of civilians, mostly women and children, saw sunlight for the first time in days, evacuating on buses organized by the United Nations and Red Cross. They arrived safely in Zaporizhia, 140 miles away. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers remain inside the plant, the last remaining stronghold of Ukrainian forces in the city.
Fox's Griff Jenkins in western Ukraine. Russian bombardment of that plant has reportedly resumed. The Biden administration trying to clarify the role of a newly announced controversial program.
The Department of Homeland Security Disinformation Governance Board will operate in a nonpartisan and apolitical way, Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters.
It's continuing work that was done by CISA back to 2020. So what this would do is continue that work, and it would help coordinate internal activities from the department related to disinformation that poses a threat to the homeland.
Psaki says disinformation could come from drug cartels targeting migrants or domestic extremist groups.
The mandate is not to adjudicate what is true or false online or otherwise.
DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says the board will not infringe on free speech or civil liberties. At the White House, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
Rejecting his claim that he'd acted in self-defense, a 20-year veteran of the New York City Police Department has been convicted of assaulting a District of Columbia police officer during the January 2021 incursion of the U.S. Capitol. Thomas Webster is to be sentenced in September. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title here with information about what a title company does. The title side of our business determines who owns a property and guarantees your ownership with a title insurance policy. The escrow side acts as an independent third party, managing the transfer of money and documents between the buyer, seller, lenders, and others. Security Title has a management of real estate closings down to a science. Give us a call. We are here to help.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
The Federal Reserve is starting to increase interest rates to fight inflation, but they're still so low, making it the perfect time to refinance your home, to lower your rate, and perhaps take advantage of its increased value to put some cash in your pocket during these uncertain times. Cash that you can have the freedom to access when you want, where you want, with your Bank Pacific Visa debit card. Lower your rate with cash in your pocket. Access your cash when you want, where you want, with your Visa debit card. Brothers Put Branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, credit conditions apply.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A great way to start a conservative, Constitution-oriented talk show here on the beautiful island of Guam on a Tuesday afternoon. So that's exactly why I did it. We go from there to Zemi Ikotny. And wonder of wonders, the Daily News finally has a real editorial today. You live long enough, you're liable to see almost anything. Here's the title, Our View, Banning Recordings in Common Areas, a Bad Idea. The Judiciary of Guam recently asked island news media outlets for input on a proposed rule that would ban all video and video recordings in the common areas of judiciary facilities unless prior consent was granted by a judicial officer. The rule would cover entrances, exit, hallways, and all spaces accessible to the public. It would not affect courtrooms where judges have the discretion to allow cameras or require media pools. It would, in effect, end the practice of interviewing attorneys and others in courthouse hallways after big trials. The Daily News has stated its opposition to this proposed rule. The, quote, public common areas of the judiciary of Guam are just that, public and common. Under the First Amendment, news media have a right to gather, record, and report the events occurring in public common areas. News professionals are representatives of the public and recording and reporting the work of government agencies and institutions serve the people. The work of the judiciary is of interest to every resident on this island. When people are prosecuted in criminal court, they are prosecuted on behalf of the people. The disputes of our communities are resolved through civil proceedings. Nobody is untouched by the acts of our judiciary, which wields the power to deprive people and freedom and finances to interpret the laws we must all live by and to make decisions that affect the lives of people it serves. The judiciary of Guam should be encouraging more engagement on behalf of the people, not less access. This rule would not apply to investitures and other official ceremonies held in common areas. Presumably, holiday parties, drug court graduations, and other events the judiciary chooses to photograph would continue to be recorded and promoted on the judiciary's social media platforms. But the news media would be prohibited from recording activity associated with more serious cases or more controversial matters of public interest being conducted in the name of the public. This rule does not serve the public, it does not serve free speech, and ultimately it is a move against government transparency. Now, here on Tall Tales, of course, we're all about transparency, and I think the Daily News has nailed it. Now, nothing earth-shattering happens in the common areas of the courthouse, but we've all become accustomed to, at the end of a criminal trial, defense counsel, perhaps Peter Santos, comes out after achieving a defense verdict. Somebody sticks a microphone in his case and says, and Peter is quoted. Now, you could get a lawyer to speak on the record at other times and places, but it ain't easy. Lawyers are busy people, and if they have anything to say, that's the time to get them to talk. When the government loses a case, that's the time to ask the prosecuting attorney, hey, what happened? I thought the guy was as guilty as sin and he got off. Where did you screw up? Not quite. But symbolically, at least, the judiciary should, as the article here says, they should at least appear to be transparent. And what would be the reason for no cameras out in the public areas of the courthouse? I can't think of a good reason at all to not allow photography in the common areas of the courthouse. So after a long, long drought, I almost couldn't find my blue pencil this morning when I was doing my show prep. It's been so long since I've used it. But here we go. The Daily News gets the coveted blue star. And I suspect the editor probably got a substantial raise for finally getting back in the win column on that one. The blue star. All right, let's see what we've got on the card for today. Of course, we've got Paul Zerzan versus systemic racism. And I think you all know by now that when we talk about what's red, that's the narrative. When we talk about what's orange, that's the facts. So I'm going to pick up where I left off yesterday, Josh Walsh versus the narrative. This is the rugby guy, the rugby boy case. And then we've got Calamity Jane versus the unborn. This afternoon, the anti-abortion folks are demonstrating in front of the legislature. Legislature is holding hearings tomorrow and Friday on Bill 187. And then next on the card, we've got Peter Scrow versus Taki. And you know whose favorite word Taki is. Now, we'll get into that a little bit more. And then we've got Tim versus Tina. And then probably the main event, Politico versus Scottus. The leak. And then I've got Weisenberger, John Weisenberger, former Attorney General John Weisenberger versus Neil and Tina. Neil Weir and Tina Rose Munga Barnes. And then I wrap up with the Ethics Commission versus the Open Government Law. And I never did get to Troy versus the Neocats. Okay, so I think I've probably said enough about Paul Zerzan and systemic racism. So let's move on to the next item on the card. Josh Walsh. Where is Josh Walsh? I hope I didn't leave it at home. I think I did. Yeah, I erroneously left it home. It's okay. I'll pick it up tomorrow. So we'll go straight to Calamity Jane versus the unborn. And this is a story that ran on the 2nd in the Post. Guam abortion services being performed via telemedicine. This is Jane Flores, so we're going to let Jane Flores take a victory lap on this one. There have been 11 abortions performed in Guam from January through March of this year, all induced via medicine, or as I was corrected on the Facebook, chemicals, according to a data obtained by the Guam Daily Post. The listed facility is Queen's University Medical Group Obstetrics and Gynecology Clinic in Hawaii. Now, why is an OBGYN clinic in Hawaii doing abortions on Guam? Jane Flores and the governor. The data doesn't explicitly state that the abortions were administered via telemedicine, but the only women's health providers in Queen's University Medical Group who hold valid licenses to practice in Guam are Dr. Sandini Redu and Dr. Bliss Kaneshiro. These are the same doctors who challenged Guam's in-person abortion consultation mandate at the district court in order to provide services through telemedicine, and the Post confirmed the doctors are now providing chemical abortion services in Guam via telemedicine. Now, a little backstory here, okay? Redu and Kaneshiro were the plaintiffs in a case versus the Attorney General and the governor on our requirement that if you're going to do the chemical abortion, a patient would have to sit down in the presence of a doctor and have a consultation with a doctor. These guys are practicing in Honolulu. They signed up, they became admitted to practice in Guam shortly before they filed this suit, and I don't think it can be gainsaid that they didn't do it so they'd have standing to raise that issue in the district court. As has been pointed out before, none of the Guam doctors, even the pro-abortion doctors like Bez and Bordaju, don't want to do them themselves. So Radu and Kaneshiro sued. The district court entered an injunction saying you can't make that requirement of the face-to-face consultation. The case is on appeal. We still have hope. And then, of course, the whole thing may go away real quickly. And now, how was it that Radu and Kaneshiro decided they wanted to do chemical abortions on Guam? Well, the Vigilance Committee did a lot of sunshine law requests, and we got the correspondence. Radu and Kaneshiro probably didn't know Guam from Adam's off ox. And the correspondence between Calamity Jane Flores and the governor, they became interested. They came, they got admitted to practice, they filed suit, and now you can get an abortion on Guam again. Congratulations, Jane. Take a victory lap. The data indicates that not only is there a want for these services on island, but a recently introduced measure to severely limit abortions here is far from moot legislation. The American Civil Liberties Union filed federal suit on behalf of Radu and Kaneshiro last year. Fellow travelers. And it's such a disappointment. I used to really admire the American Civil Liberties Union. They would take the really hard free speech cases. And we all know that freedom of speech doesn't mean anything unless you have the ability to say things that are very, very unpopular. And that's where the Civil Liberties Union used to be. Nowadays, they're just in the left adjunct of the Democrat Party.
It's as if they have confirmed that you can create a group of humans that don't deserve rights.
Exactly. Yeah, contrary to their own purposes, yeah. Yeah, Guam's informed consent law imposes a 24-hour waiting period on abortions and requires that a woman must be provided certain information, quote, in person. This makes it impossible to administer chemical abortion through telemedicine, according to the suit, which also challenged a clinic requirement, but that matter was settled. At the time the suit was filed, Guam had been without an abortion doctor for a few years, and the plaintiffs argued that people were being forced. You know, we get so careless with our language. Who was ever forced to go to Hawaii to get an abortion? Now, what that means to me is that someone is behind the woman with a gun, holding it to her head. You will go to the airport. You will get on that plane. You will go to Hawaii. Now, I suppose that fathers might do that from time to time, but this can't be the all-purpose word. But that's what the Post says, that people were being forced to travel to Hawaii or the mainland for a procedure that became more expensive the longer it took to raise funding, a particular concern with Guam's high poverty rate. The Wuhan virus pandemic also made travel difficult or impossible for some. Current U.S. Supreme Court precedent establishes abortion as a right prior to viability of the fetus outside of the womb, while states can regulate abortions even in the early state of pregnancy. They cannot impose an undue burden on exercising the rights. This comes from Planned Parenthood versus Casey, by the way. The Office of Attorney General, in defending Guam law, argued that the in-person requirement is not a substantial obstacle for women seeking abortions. But in September 2021, the District Court of Guam ordered that local officials be temporarily enjoined from enforcing the in-person mandate as the case proceeded. Well, this granted an initial victory for the plaintiffs and residents seeking services. There have been a myriad of challenges launched nationally to curb the exercise of abortion rights in the U.S. In early April, Guam became the latest jurisdiction to introduce a, quote, heartbeat measure following the successful implementation of similar legislation in Texas. The Guam Heartbeat Act of 2022, or Bill 291, would ban abortions once a fetal heartbeat is detected, about 6 weeks into a pregnancy. The only exception is a medical necessity, and there is no exception for rape or incest in the introduced version of the bill. Every time I see this, I think, here's somebody else who's writing, whose brain is disconnected from his hand. There's no exception for rape or incest. If you're anti-abortion, you're anti-abortion because you don't favor the killing of a helpless innocent. Now, a person is helpless and innocent regardless if he's the product of incest or rape. So when you throw that in there, it's kind of like, gee, this is really crazy. They don't even recognize an exception for rape or incest. No! No, because that exception eats up the whole rule. You know, the rule being that there's never a good reason to take the life of a helpless, innocent person. Yeah, so the only exception is medical necessity, and there's no exception for rape or incest in the introduced version of the bill. My. The measure was met with celebration by anti-abortion groups and condemnation by others. Bureau of Women's Affairs Director Jane Flores criticized the measure when it was introduced, but also called it moot. Well, it's not moot, thanks to you, Jane. At the time, as the Bureau was not aware of anyone who can perform or induce abortions on Guam. Now, Jane, you're in favor of abortion. Why aren't you out there protecting the women that want to play rugby with other women? Can't we do that too, Jose?
No, they're outside of the womb.
Yeah. I mean, this old, if you're so pro-life, why don't you pay more attention to the kids that are outside the ones that have been born? Well, if you're so concerned about women, Jane, why don't you speak out for the women that want to be playing rugby and don't want to be run over by men? How about that? Going on, not only is 6 weeks earlier than most women realize they are pregnant, as opponents to the legislation argue, it's also far earlier than fetal viability and goes against precedent established by the U.S. Supreme Court. However, the Guam legislation utilizes the unique enforcement method as Texas law, which has so far allowed states to evade judicial review. Now, people who like to trumpet would say this, even the Supreme Court says that, without understanding the difference between a Supreme Court decision and the shadow docket. Instead of empowering government officials, the measure authorizes private citizens to file civil lawsuits against anyone who may have violated this provision, except for the woman who proceeded with the abortion. Otherwise, the measure casts a wide net, including anyone aiding or abetting an illegal abortion. Would that include Ray Dew and Kaneshiro? Let's hope so. A challenge was lodged against the Texas law, but the Supreme Court refused to block its implementation, stating that petitioners failed to make their case in light of complex and novel antecedent procedural questions. For example, federal courts enjoy the power to enjoin individuals tasked with enforcing laws, but not the laws themselves, the court stated. Yeah, you can't hold a law in contempt of court. Thus, Texas lawmakers fashioned their abortion laws enforcement scheme in a unique way because federal constitutional challenges to state law are normally brought against officers charged with enforcement, according to Justice Sonia Sotomayor, one of the 4 dissenting justices. She criticized the majority for burying their heads in the sand. That's very good. That's the kind of rhetoric we expect to hear from a Supreme Court justice. In light of a flagrantly unconstitutional law created to evade judicial scrutiny and prevent women from exercising their right to abortion. A few months later, the Supreme Court allowed a small window of opportunity by stating a challenge could be brought against certain licensing officials who may have to take enforcement action if the Texas law is violated. But the Texas Supreme Court determined officials were not authorized to enforce the strict regulations, effectively ending that challenge to the law. On April 26, after receiving the Texas Supreme Court determination, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals officially ended the challenge by remanding the case back to the district court with instructions to dismiss all challenges to private enforcement provisions of the Texas statute. So the Texas heartbeat law, right as we sit here this minute, is good law. The Guam Daily Post requested clarification from the office of Talina Nelson, who introduced the Heartbeat Act, on how it would apply to telemedicine while Guam is enjoined from enforcing its in-person mandate, and if a civil lawsuit can be brought under its provisions against a person living off-island but licensed to practice here. No response was provided. It was Talina. You'll recall Talina and the 1982 Guam Superior Court decision that said that the governor had to sign off on these programmatic agreements. When I asked for it from Talina's office, they wrote back and said they didn't have it. I wrote back again and I said, give me all public records that show that you just didn't bring this forward to get some earned media. The response to that sunshine law was the digital copy of the Organic Act.
Thank God she didn't give him that.
Yeah. So, Talina can introduce a bill, but she can't answer any questions about it. Attorney Vanessa Williams. Now, if you've forgotten who Vanessa Williams is, let me refresh your recollection on her take on abortion.
This wasn't Miss America, Vanessa Williams.
No, it wasn't. But, it's easy to confuse the two. And Miss America, Vanessa Williams, was DQ'd. Remember that? And our very own Kim Santos ratcheted in to winning the contest.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Ah, Guam connection.
Maybe that's why she's named Vanessa Williams. She's probably, the time works out right. It's close to 30 years ago that the other Vanessa came along. Attorney Vanessa Williams, quote, "It's impossible to separate our choice of whether and when to have children from every other choice in our lives." That's great, Vanessa. Let's take a short break and we'll come back to Calamity Jane versus the unborn.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY. Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spittin' truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
So when the Post called Talina with some questions, someone answered the phone at Talina's office and said just one word: pass. Attorney Vanessa Williams, co-counsel in the ACLU lawsuit, stated they are still assessing the impact of Bill 291 on their ability to provide telemedicine, but added that even if a patient could obtain care before the 6-week cutoff, the bill's ultrasound requirements make it difficult, if not impossible, to use telemedicine to provide safe access to abortion services. What is a safe access business? Everything I read about the chemical abortions, it is unsafe. I can't imagine anybody who understands what they're doing taking those pills.
Keyword, hemorrhaging.
Hemorrhaging, yeah. We're considering all possible options, including litigation, if it becomes law. However, no one should let it get to that point. We cannot allow politicians to play games with our lives. We can't allow them to play games with our lives. Once again, Vanessa Williams hates games. It's impossible to separate our choice of whether and when to have children from every other choice in our lives. It's just a game. It's like a board game. You know, you got over here, you have childbirth, over here you have vacation, over here going to grad school, right? You shake the dice and you count the spaces on the dice, and that's how it goes. Vanessa says, no one should let it get to this point. We cannot allow politicians to play games with our lives and hope the courts will clean up the mess.
Sounds like she's on the anti-abortion side.
It does, when you talk about cleaning up the mess. Instead of playing politics, lawmakers should be focused on the real issues that affect our community, such as infant mortality, infant and maternal mortality. Well, the governor has spoken out about infant mortality. She's all for it.
No honk because she said that.
That's right. Yes, that's true. Williams is a member of Guam People for Choice, a group of women opposed to legislation restricting reproductive rights. Despite its decisions, the Supreme Court has not yet weighed the constitutionality of the Texas law on which the Guam Heartbeat Act is based. In its September 2021 decision, the court stated the order is not based on any conclusion about the constitutionality of Texas's law and in no way limits other procedurally proper challenges to the Texas law. And in its decision a few months later, the U.S. Supreme Court specifically stated the ultimate merits question, whether the Texas law is consistent with the Constitution, was not before the court at that time. New challenges to the Texas law have been lodged, according to the Texas Tribune. That includes a federal suit by former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis, claiming that the Texas law violates free speech and due process rights. But these legal battles play out as a challenge to the right of abortion also looms in the Supreme Court. The Guam Office of Attorney General appealed a preliminary injunction on the in-person mandate ordered by the district court. The appeal now sits in the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, where it's on hold as it awaits the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. That's the leak. This is the case that may end up overturning Roe versus Wade, the landmark Supreme Court case that has established abortion as a right in the United States for the last 5 decades. Arguments were heard in December, and the court is expected to issue its decision in the summer. The 2022 Guam abortion data was provided to the Post by Sharon O'Malley, co-chair of Guam Catholic Pro-Life, who was issued the data by the Department of Public Health and Social Services. After obtaining the data, the port requested the latest official abortion statistical report from DPHSS. Reports from 2018 to 2021 were provided. There were 41 abortions recorded in 2018, but this was the last year Guam had a known abortion provider on the island. No abortions were reported in 2019 and 2020. One abortion complication was reported in 2021, along with 5 other abortions, but the abortion procedure types were redacted due to HIPAA concerns. HIPAA is like Title IX. All you have to HIPAA. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
The method of procedure.
Yeah.
I thought it's law that's not a violation of HIPAA. Doesn't Guam have a reporting law?
It does. Yeah, it certainly does. But this HIPAA, all you got to do is say HIPAA or Title IX.
Insular cases.
Yeah, insular case. You don't have to explain, and people just back away from it without any good reason to. Okay, so once again, Calamity Jane was appointed by the governor to figure out a way to bring an abortionist to Guam. She publicly admitted this. She admitted that she was working with Planned Parenthood, that she was writing letters around trying to find someone to come to Guam to do an abortion. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Sunshine Law request turned up correspondence between her and others in the governor's office and Kaneshiro and Radu, the 2 Hawaii abortionists who were apparently lured out here, got admitted to practice on Guam so they'd have standing to file suit. The ACLU filed a suit for them, hired who else but Vanessa Williams as local counsel, and got a pro-abortion ruling. So Jane has made absolutely no bones whatsoever about being 102% pro-abortion, right?
Unapologetic.
Unapologetic, wears it like a badge. Well, there are a few things I check every day. I read the papers online. I go to the websites for the 2 TV stations. I always go to Candid, and I go to Jungle Watch. And this is a good routine. I think the key word here for those of us who live here, who really live here and not just exist, the key word is engagement. To know what's going on, to know who's doing what to whom, and why it's being done, etc. And Jungle Watch is a good place to do that. And here's Jungle Watch as it appears today. Growing scandal in the Catholic Church on Guam. The Chancery is doing, and you'll soon see that it's not what the Chancery is doing, it's what the Chancery is not doing. Yeah, and the subtitle, that's right, the Chancery is doing absolutely nothing. What is this scandal we're talking about? Well, it's been front and center in the local media for the last 4 weeks. We're talking about the Legislature Bill 291, introduced by a bipartisan group in order to give more protection to the unborn. This has led to a vociferous and vicious campaign of white lies and gross mischaracterizations from radical females advocating for infanticide under certain circumstances. Governor Lilian Guerrero Cook, fearing that this time her candidacy for re-election would run into trouble with some of her base, has chosen to unleash her pit bull, Jane Flores, Calamity Jane Flores, also known as Jane the Pit Bull Flores, to lead the charge against this legislation. Her daughter, Dr. Cook Huynh, even wrote a letter to the editor trying to give cover to the fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants medical arguments against the bill, only to be schooled in an adverse column by Dr. Shea. We covered that on Tall Tales, yeah. Saving the life of the mother. This has not slowed down the campaign against the Bill 291. Yesterday, Sunday, May 1st, Jane Flores decided to go to church in my parish with her family. It's not her regular parish. Apparently, she has some issues with some of the parishioners there, that is, at her regular parish, because of her advocacy, which brings scandal and created tension in said parish. Now, scandal means something a little different in the Catholic Church than it does, in ordinary parlance. Can you give us a short definition of scandal, Jose?
Just real quick, it's when somebody does something that can deliberately lead another into grave sin, whether it's the act itself or omission of admonishment of the act.
Okay. So advocating abortion comes within the ambit of scandal, right?
Yes.
Scandal. Yesterday, Jane Flores had the audacity to present herself for communion, and taking advantage of the mask, she received it in her hands, bringing more scandal around another parish. When I asked the priest after the office why he granted communion to the person responsible for bringing chemical abortion on the island, he seemed absolutely shocked and dismayed that he had been lured into into doing so. This pastor and several others contacted earlier today agree that the chancery and the archbishop not taking any action on this subject has created a situation of lose-lose for all priests as well as parishioners being distraught by such situation. Here we have an individual who advocates vociferously against the teachings of our church, but also against the most simple and basic moral issue of infanticide, who deliberately flaunts her arrogance and brings scandal, shame, and discourse to parishes around the island, all the while putting her own soul in danger of eternal damnation for receiving the Eucharist while not in a state of grace. Why does the Chancery not react accordingly? Is it because we have no chancellor? Or is it because the multi-hats wearer from Detroit, Father Richards, has left us? Is it because the new Vicar General is still not up to speed with his duties? Or is it because the Archbishop is ready to resign due to health reasons? That's why I never let a day go by without looking at Jungle Watch. So, of course, he hits the nail right on the head, and I got into this, when the bishop issued his statement about Bill 291. You're right, Bishop, it's a good bill, but what about the rest of it? And Jose, you can explain to our listening audience why people who do what Jane has done, that is, come out and directly and vociferously engage in scandal by encouraging people to disobey or to not comply with the church's teaching, that's instant excommunication, correct?
I think the word, I'm going to try to pronounce it this time, sententiae.
Sententiae.
Latae sententiae. And that's where someone who procures a completed abortion, who advocates for abortion, who promotes it, and who even performs an abortion, and is Catholic, has automatically excommunicated themselves.
Okay. So is that excommunication final?
It's final in the sense that there is no earthly authority that can compound it. It's already done. And so it's really, and that's where the scandal comes into play. It's really up to the authority to be able to point out, not just for the person who's excommunicated themselves, because they can bring themselves back to the church.
Okay.
For those who are witness to the scandal as well, there could be people who are not strong in their faith, who are still questioning, who are still on a journey, and see something like that, receiving communion not in the state of grace, a public figure who has publicly denounced the church teaching, yet still receiving communion.
Yeah, so there probably are people out there who are saying, Tall Tales, Klitzkie beats up on Jane every day. But she works for the governor, and she's for abortion, and I saw her at communion yesterday, so I guess it can't be all that bad. That kind of a process.
Maybe the church is evolving.
Yeah.
See, these are real questions, though. I mean, we make light of it, but I've heard these questions before. It's time for the church to come to modern times.
Yeah. Let me just take this apart, and let me take Catholicism out of it, and let's just talk in terms of human behavior. If a person subscribes to a particular code of conduct and is public about subscribing to that particular code of conduct, regardless of what the code of conduct is, and then later on goes out and flaunts the subscription to that code of conduct, what do we call that? It's hypocrisy at best, right? And it's probably a whole lot worse than hypocrisy at worst. So if I said, once a Marine, always a Marine, then I shouldn't be permitted to come along and publicly say the Marine Corps is a bunch of crooks and it's this, that, it's that. I have to remove myself from that particular association in order to be able to do that and not be branded a hypocrite. So forget about Catholicism for the moment. Jane is just a hypocrite. If she wants to be pro-abortion, fine. If she wants to be a Catholic, fine. But you can't be a Catholic and be pro-abortion. And if you try to hold up both ends of the rope like that, then you got problems going beyond the church. That would be my non-Catholic analysis of what we're talking about here. But it is certainly a job for the church. And, of course, our Pope, Joe Biden, said he met with the Pope, and the Pope said, you could continue to take communion, Joe. Pope told me that, but, it came from Joe Biden. So talk about an unreliable source.
He told me in my basement.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a short break here.
The Federal Reserve is starting to increase interest rates to fight inflation, but they're still so low, making it the perfect time to refinance your home, to lower your rate, and perhaps take advantage of its increased value to put some cash in your pocket during these uncertain times. Cash that you can have the freedom to access when you want, where you want, with your Bank Pacific Visa debit card. Lower your rate, put cash in your pocket. Access your cash when you want, where you want, with your Visa debit card. Brothers put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, credit conditions apply.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Okay, so here we are, back in Tall Tales. I want to go backwards to Josh Walsh versus the narrative. This is Rugby Boy. And Josh Walsh is the only guy that comes out of this. I would say he's the only man in the whole lash-up. Josh Walsh comes out as a hero of the whole thing. The one guy who knows what's right and does it, and doesn't have to do it with some politically correct language. So this is a story that ran in the Post, and the Post covered the whole thing very, very well. And by the way, they covered the whole abortion thing very well, too. Congratulations, Post. Earlier this week, Guam Department of Education, earlier this week, Superintendent of Education John Fernandez wrote an email to Guam Rugby Union board member Paul Claros that a transgender student athlete from Guam High, that means a boy, playing on her girls' rugby team must be allowed to play. This is Superintendent Fernandez. You got to let the boy play with the girls. He wrote that disallowing the students' participation would directly violate Title IX. Oh, you can just imagine people, The mildest reaction was a clutching of pearls. A couple people actually fainted, I understand, when the word Title IX came out.
The Germans are coming.
Fernandez' email was written after an issue arose on the season's opening day when a transgender member of the Guam High's girls rugby team, means a boy, allegedly injured at least two members of the Tejan High School Titans. In that email, Fernandez told Claros that it was the responsibility of GRU's referees to properly exercise their authority and discretion to ensure the safety of all matches and all athletes who participate in ISA competition. This, to me, could only mean one thing. According to the other report, 3 girls were injured, and that the guy was really a hard-charging rugby player. So if Claros would give the instructions that Fernandez wanted, what he'd have to do is pull the boy aside and say, buddy, you got to tone it down a little bit. We know you're really good, you're really strong. These are girls, so pull it back a little bit or you're not going to be able to play. That's basically the message that Fernandez is sending. Properly exercise their authority and discretion to ensure the safety of all matches. Fernandez also wrote the GRU rules do not address transgender issues, meaning boys playing in girls rugby, and any amendments to its governance would have to wait until next season. Now here's the capper. We look forward to learning more about the issue and working with GRU over the summer to set rules that will result in an inclusive, safe, and competitive season next year.
Wrong.
Inclusive and competitive. Can't be both.
Maybe he ought to study Title IX first.
Yeah. So I wonder if this is the reason that he quit. Fernandez quit. He couldn't take the heat. You know, he's too woke to have to eat the decision that Josh Walsh forced on him. In any case, given this performance, I can't say that I'm going to shed a tear over his disappearance. We don't need a woke director as you were superintendent of education. The article goes on to say, in response to Fernandez's email, GRU Secretary, Guam Rugby Union Secretary Josh Walsh wrote a letter. In that letter, Walsh wrote that GDOE was notified in March 2022 that interscholastic competition would be guided by World Rugby bylaws, which preclude male transgender athletes from participating in women's rugby if they have not undergone the transitioning process before reaching puberty. In other words, if they haven't had the right kind of hormone injections. And I mentioned this yesterday, you know, so many athletes have really been punished for injecting hormones into their bodies, like steroids. And, you know, we kind of have a drug-free workplace as far as sports is concerned, unless it's drugs that are in line with the wokeism. Then it's not only okay, but recommended. Walsh stated that the GRU is a member of the World Rugby, the sports governing body, and it abides by its rules regarding transgender athletes because of player welfare considerations. Walsh also stated that the Department of Education notified GRU on April 23, one day before competition was set to resume after the Easter break, that the Public School League did not provide any assurances that the GRU and its volunteers and officials who put on girls rugby competition would be indemnified for liability that may be caused by any injuries sustained and attributable to the boy athlete play. You're on your own, Department of Ed. We're just going to be woke. We're not going to indemnify. By transferring the responsibility of players' safety from GDOE to GRU, but not allowing protection from any potential adverse action, Walsh wrote, the decision put Guam Rugby in an impossible situation. On April 27, after delaying the season a week to discuss the issue of the transgender players' participation in girls rugby, the GRU held a coaches' meeting. After that meeting, GRU decided to disallow the Guam High School boy player from participating as a female athlete, stating that eligibility rules cannot allow the risk to players to be increased by allowing people who have force and power and advantages conferred by testosterone to play with and against those who do not. And then he cited world rugby laws, etc. In the day's opening match at girls varsity division contest, the Guam High School Panthers are scheduled to play Academy of Our Lady of Guam Cougars at 9 a.m. We informed the league that the GRU will not proceed to organize and put on the 2022 high school rugby competition, but will do so only within the contours of Guam Rugby Football Union, etc. bylaws that explicitly cite to all conference for the U19 World Rugby laws, while stated, under those rules and regulations, transgender women, meaning boys, may not currently play women's rugby because of the size, force, and power-producing advantages by testosterone during puberty and adolescence and the resultant player welfare risks this creates. Those guidelines do not allow for Guam high school player, for the boy to play in the girls' competition. I got a little bit more on this right after the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
A leaked Supreme Court opinion shakes Washington. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Politico reports they have received a leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion on a Missouri abortion law, which seems to show a majority of the justices are ready to strike down Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion, reportedly calling that decision egregiously wrong from the start. But Fox's Supreme Court correspondent Shannon Bream cautions.
Until it's signed off and it's issued from the court's office officially as an opinion of the court, it's not the real deal. So this is a draft, if it is legit, as I've been led to believe it is, from February, which means a lot of things could have changed. There could be justices who would read this and say, like, wow, this is sweeping. I'm not prepared to sign into something this sweeping. Or you could have 5 justices who've already said, this is something I will sign on to.
Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley, who clerked at the Supreme Court, says this unprecedented leak looks political.
I think this is plainly an attempt by the left to try and change the outcome in this case and corrupt the process. And the court must not allow that to happen.
Swift reaction on the steps of the High Court. And from congressional leaders.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, in a joint statement with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, calling the reported ruling on abortion an abomination and one of the most damaging decisions in modern history, adding, quote, every Republican senator who supported Senator McConnell and voted for Trump justices, pretending that this day would never come, will now have to explain themselves to the American people. But Republicans like Utah Senator Mike Lee are calling for the opinion to be released as soon as possible, telling Fox News at Night,
if you allow this to sit out there, you're allowing this kind of tactic to work.
Typically, court opinions are released in late June.
Fox's Sean Lanchel. Fox News cannot independently verify the Politico report. America is listening to Fox News.
The Federal Reserve is starting to increase interest rates to fight inflation, but they're still so low, making it the perfect time to refinance your home, to lower your rate, and perhaps take advantage of its increased value to put some cash in your pocket during these uncertain times. Cash that you can have the freedom to access when you want, where you want, with your Bank Pacific Visa debit card. Lower your rate, put cash in your pocket. Access your cash when you want, where you want, with your Visa debit card. For those branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, credit conditions apply.
Hafa-day, Patsy Gogui from Security Title here with information about what a title company does. The title side of our business determines who owns a property and guarantees your ownership with a title insurance policy. The escrow side acts as an independent third party, managing the transfer of money and documents between the buyer, seller, lenders, and others. Security Title has the management of real estate closings down to a science. Give us a call. We are here to help.
Now,
President Biden will be on the road today to inspect some of the weapons helping to defend Ukraine.
President Biden is headed south to Alabama today. He's scheduled to visit an assembly plant operated by Lockheed Martin in Troy. This is the facility that builds the Javelin missile, which is sold to the U.S. government by the defense contractor and what has proven to be a key weapon the U.S. is giving Ukraine as that country continues to defend itself against Russian invaders. It's caused the supply of Javelin missiles to dwindle, and there has been talk of invoking the Defense Production Act to facilitate making more. Eben Brown, Fox News.
Still no sign of the Alabama corrections officer or the murder suspect she apparently helped free from jail last Friday. The U.S. Marshal Service now offering a $10,000 reward for information that will help them locate the pair. California's population in 2021 shrank for the second year in a row, according to a new estimate from the California Department of Finance, which says the state lost 117,552 people last year, giving a population of just over 39 million residents, still far ahead of Texas, which is the second most populous state. Two Midwestern states deciding they've got to draw the line someplace.
Almost 200 years after its founding, and Michigan's border with Indiana remains surprisingly uncertain, creating problems for police investigating traffic accidents and residents resolving property disputes, and prompting the Michigan State Senate, if approved by Governor Gretchen Whitmer, to establish a commission to meet with a similar and already approved commission in Indiana, using state-funded surveyors to finalize the state's boundaries. Very few changes are expected. Michigan's border with Ohio and Wisconsin have also been revisited. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
And in Washington, I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Day. I'm the owner of Guam's largest tourist attraction group. The pandemic's been very tough for all of us, and particularly for my team members. So I'm really appreciative and grateful for the PUA assistance to our team members, and more recently, the SVOG federal grant that allowed us to reopen these facilities and re-employ everyone at a critical time when PUA ended. From myself and my team, on behalf of all of us, thank you for the federal funds that allowed us to reopen.
The federal fund you provide saved many jobs. Thank you so much.
We employ about 35 technicians for our shows. Thank you for the federal funds that kept us going.
Thank you for helping with the federal funds.
Thank you for the federal funds.
Thank you for helping to save our jobs.
Thank you for the federal funds.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Okay, so here we are back from the big halftime show. I got Troy on the line who wants to talk about girls rugby, and I know exactly what he's going to talk about. He's going to debunk John W. Fernandez, and the W stands for woke, doesn't it, Troy?
Hi, Bob. And hi, Jose. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, doesn't the W in John W. Fernandez stand for woke, Troy?
But, you know, I like John, so I'm not going to ding him, but we did put out a story that based on federal rules or national rules on a Title IX that contradicts the statement that he put out. You know, we found under Section 106 of Title IX, which is the sex discrimination portion of the rules affecting funding for public schools throughout the nation, that, well, the national government actually has some common sense. And at least according to the current rules, public schools are allowed to segregate boys from girls when it comes to contact sports. And they define contact sports. They're very specific about it. And rugby is among those contact sports. And it says they can have separate teams. And so there's no risk of being in non-compliance with Title IX, according to a plain reading of the rules. And we just put out a story about that as well.
So this kind of takes the fun out of Title IX, Troy, because I think the Fernandez approach is all you have to do is say Title IX, and all the potted plants in the room wilt.
Well,
the lights start to flicker, and everybody who thinks that girls rugby should be for girls just kind of crawls under the table.
Well, you know, if you're not with the woke agenda, you're a part of some backward American history that should all be forgotten.
Exactly.
I don't understand that agenda, Bob. You know, I'm part of that LGBT whatever community, and I actually don't even understand what all of the new letters and that whole thing stands for. But maybe I just belong to a generation that has a hard time understanding all this new stuff going on now. But I was hoping I could talk to you about abortion as well, because I had a question. Would that be okay?
Sure.
I'm wondering if Roe v. Wade is struck down, does the 1991 statute, the Bell Areola statute that the legislature actually passed, does that go into effect? Because I don't recall that the legislature ever rescinded the statute. It was just struck down by the Ninth Circuit or the Supreme Court or whatever it was.
You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, I wrote a letter to the editor on that very subject, saying that we had a very stringent anti-abortion law going back to 1990, and it is still the law, quote unquote. And although it has been judicially stricken, it is still a good expression of the public policy of the people of this island. We don't want no stinking abortions. Now, if you were to go online, you would see that the law that it was on the books before the 1999 amendment is back online, and then the compiler's notes say because of the of that court case which held that law unconstitutional, the prior law comes back into existence. And then the compiler laid out the old law kind of like a footnote. But if Roe versus Wade is reversed, then the old law we've already outlawed abortion. We don't need to do it again.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Well, I'm glad that's so. You know, I've been pro-life for a long time, way before I became more of a practicing Catholic, and it was just because I was doing a book report in high school, and I really didn't have a position on it until I started to think about it, and then it always struck me. You know, we have a murder laws that have a double standard, where it's okay to murder someone that's of this age, but it's not okay to murder someone who is above that age.
When you really sit down and scrape the paint and varnish off of it, the whole pro-abortion stance doesn't make sense, and that's why they got to go to straw man fallacy and invent things, and take the cultural Marxist approach of changing the language. Whoever thought that reproductive rights would mean killing a baby in the womb?
Well, you know, God bless Justice Samuel Alito, and the other 4 justices, and I hope they stay the course.
Absolutely.
You have a good day, Bob. Thank you so much for your time, and Jose, thank you so much for putting me on.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for debunking the theory that all you have to do is say Title IX and you win the argument. Yeah, Troy Torres chimes in. Title IX, yeah. So this is an even more serious indictment of John Fernandez.
Illiteracy?
Not knowing what he's talking. Maybe wait a minute. Maybe not knowing what he's talking. Not caring what he's talking about. I want an inclusive, competitive system. I know that Title IX has something to do with this. So Title IX, you guys. Title IX. Can you count? Can you count here? Title IX. How many fingers am I holding up? Yeah. 9.
Red.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I got a couple more things to put together on this.
We got to say it though, Bob. Out of how many days this story was in the papers,
yeah,
not one reporter thought of looking at Title IX itself.
Exactly.
Thank you, Troy.
Yeah, and that's why, that's why I take so much time on the show to praise him. He's a muckraker. He gets out there and rakes the muck up and examines it and finds out what's really going on, where everybody else, well, we got the press release, what more do we need to do? So we have the whole Calamity Jane thing, and let's wait a second here. I was talking about, get mixed up in my papers here. Yeah, I was talking about Josh Walsh versus the narrative. And now we find out that the rugby union says boys don't play girls rugby. I wonder if this answers the question posed by Lacia Casil when Lacia Casil said, where's that story here? Lacia Casil, who determines even playing field when it comes to gender identity in sports? Lacia Casil. And here's the beginning of that article. Let them play. KM News sat down with one transgender community advocate weighing in on the issue. It's becoming a polarizing issue after a local high school rugby match, quote, to discriminate based on fear and bigotry. It hurts, stated Lacia Casil. Who decides what an even playing field is when it comes to transgender athletes joining the team that fits their gender identity? Well, I guess you know the answer now is Josh Walsh. And the answer is, if you're a boy, you can't play in the girls' rugby games. Pretty simple. Okay, so with regard to Calamity Jane and the growing scandal in the Catholic Church, I go next to the item on the card labeled Pete Scrow versus Taki. And Kosinya na gwahi hinasumo no tinasun mizu no ana eleknya I gobyerno no todo na tautod zanya Bill 187 pinataki todo. You remember when she said that?
I sure do.
Yeah. So by way of forecast, we're going to have a Lou Leon Guerrero show on Friday. And Lou is so deserving, just as we have the screen test for Hope Cristobal on Monday, we're going to have the Lou Leon Guerrero show on Fridays, where Lou explains to us her position on abortion and infanticide on Hadzi Pinataki. So make sure you're around for that. And, I got to do one more thing here before I get into this. Kind of disjointed today, a little disorganized, but On the story of the on the story of Rugby Boy, the May edition of the May edition of Pacific Island Times is out. You heard Ray talking about it this morning, and the editorial by the editor, Marvik Kagarangan, which was titled "Every Chance to Milk the Feds." And Ray spoke about that at some length, approvingly. Well, there's a story on page 8 of this month's edition that's by Guess Who, and the title of the story is "A Fairy Tale About Rugby and the Wokesters." Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you. You want to go to Payless and pick up a copy of this, but I will read one part of the story for you, one part of the article, and it goes like this: "What are little boys made of? Frogs and snails and puppy dog tails. That's what little boys are made of. What are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and all that's nice. That's what little girls are made of." So you're going to want to read this this article, and the whole paper comes out once a month on the first day of the month. $1.25 is probably one of the best bargains on the island because, like Troy, Marvik and her gang over there at Pacific Island Times actually dig into the stories. They just don't take them at face value. And she's got a top-notch group of columnists, of course, me. Okay, so we're back to Pete Scrove versus Taki. And Pete Scrove put out this fact sheet with the help of Jacqueline Terlahi, and he lists 9 legal facts, and here they are. Fact number 1, the Guam Heartbeat Act of 2022 was modeled after the Texas Heartbeat Act. Fact 2, the Texas Heartbeat Act was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott on May 19, 2021. The act took effect on September 1, 2021. Fact 3, in over 22 legal challenges opposing the Texas Heartbeat Act, no court has struck down the law. It continues to remain law. Legal fact 4, there have been 2 hearings before the United States Supreme Court about the Texas Heartbeat Act, and neither time did the Supreme Court find it to be unconstitutional. Legal fact 5, just last week in a unanimous decision, the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals specifically upheld the provision that gives private citizens the right to file civil action against any person that performs, induces, aids, or abets an abortion. Legal fact 6, there are no sections, provisions, sentences, or word in the Guam Heartbeat Act that imposes criminal sanctions. The act even prevents the Attorney General from issuing an indictment. Legal fact 7, the Guam Heartbeat Act specifically gives the power to the people, not government, to enforce violations of the act by civil actions. This particular provision is the same provision in the Texas Heartbeat Act that just last week the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit did not strike down. In fact, the court's decision also included instructions to the lower court to dismiss all claims alleged by the pro-abortion plaintiffs. Legal fact 8, the ongoing Guam District Court case relative to chemical abortions via telemedicine consults does not provide any legal positions that adversely affect the Guam Heartbeat Act. The district court involved the challenge of a law that involved government action by government officials. The Heartbeat Act leaves decisions in the hands of the private citizens, not the government. Legal fact 9, the United States 50-year-old decision in Roe v. Wade has not, despite over 22 legal challenges, resulted in a court finding the Texas Heartbeat Act unconstitutional. Similarly to the district court case, Roe v. Wade involved the challenge of a law where government was responsible for enforcing an abortion law. The Guam Heartbeat Act leaves the entire decision into the hands of people. Legal fact 10, the Guam Heartbeat Act is constitutional. So nice going, Pete. And you didn't have to, you didn't even need to get any of the straw man fallacy like the Guam Heartbeat Act doesn't take care of children after they're born. And the Guam Bureau of Women's Affairs doesn't stick up for girl rugby players.
Those who oppose the heartbeat bill are poopy heads. Oh, wait.
That's a legal
that's
term.
a legal term, okay.
That's a legal term I'm not familiar Jose. Okay, we're staying on the whole abortion thing. We got a letter from Tim here. So this is on the card. It's Tim versus Tina. Vice Speaker trying to have it both ways. Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munga Barnes. Bill 9293, the Pregnancy Support Act of 2022, introduced by Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munga Barnes, would require fathers to pay child support before the child is born. Since payment of child support cannot be mandated for a clump of cells or a tissue mass, Barnes' bill functionally defines an unborn child as a human being with rights. This should mean that supporters of the recently introduced heartbeat bill should be able to count on Barnes' legislative support. However, Barnes was recently quoted as saying, quote, "This bill," that's the heartbeat bill, "asks me to weigh the personal rights of women against my own personal beliefs." Translated, this means that even while introducing a bill that effectively defines the humanity of an unborn child, Barnes nevertheless supports the right to kill it. The Pregnancy Support Act is Barnes' usual play for both sides of the fence, which is nothing new for Barnes. Pursuant to the voting rights sheet for Bill 195-32, Barnes passed twice on a vote for a bill requiring normal medical care for a child who survives a failed abortion. That's the one where Lou said, "You shouldn't pass that bill. Let the baby die." "I don't believe in abortion. I believe in infanticide," she said. Yeah, Barnes passed twice on a vote for a bill requiring normal medical care for a child who survives a failed abortion. And then, when it was obvious the bill was going to pass, Barnes voted yes. I used to go into this at some depth. Strategic voting, where a senator wants to vote one way, but because of political considerations realizes there's a risk, so they'll pass and see how the count is going. And if the count is going right, sometimes they can vote the way they want to vote and get the result they want also. They could vote in favor of a bill that they want to fail because they've counted the votes and there aren't enough to pass, so they can go over and vote that way. So I used to explain that when people passed, but since Amanda Shelton did it on the override of Bill 11, I said, from now on, no, I'm not going to make that explanation. I'm just going to take you at your word. You're too stupid to figure out whether you're going to vote aye or nay until the roll call is called on the vote. Then you got to pass where you scratch your head and try to figure it out. But that's exactly what Tina did. Tina was trying to be smart. She didn't want the bill to pass. When she saw that there were enough votes to cause it to pass, she played it safe and voted aye herself. All right, let's see what we got next here. Now,
and strategy-wise, and I've told you this before, I applaud these kind of bills that she's promoting because it further strengthens the notion, like Tim said, that there's a living being there.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if they introduced this one to try to counter the heartbeat bill or to try to discourage, right, as a distraction. But thank you, Tina.
My suspicion is this, that Tina did this to be able to say, if you really care about babies, this is the kind of legislation. I really care about babies, but I'm not going to interfere with a woman's reproductive rights. But if she decides, exercising her reproductive rights, that she wants to carry the child, then by God, we got to make the man pay for it.
Oh, so I only care about your baby only if you care about your baby.
That's right.
So
Otherwise,
if
I
you
don't
want to beat your kid, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. And logical consistency has never been the strong suit of any of these folks. Okay, now we're getting here to the main event. Let's go to Wrigley Field, and we'll come back to Politico versus Scottus.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Okay, so here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago for that big seventh inning stretch. Everybody in the bleachers is talking about the leak from the Supreme Court. I found out about it this afternoon, went on the net, and the internet is going crazy with this story. And this is correct because although politicians are very adept at using the leak, it's a part of any public relations expert's toolkit, the well-placed leak at the proper time. But the Supreme Court ordinarily doesn't leak. It's very hard to find out what's going on behind those closed doors. So when the Supreme Court, when there's a leak from the Supreme Court about probably the most important decision decided this century, if not longer, it's really news. Now, I'm going to get into the leak part after we talk a little bit about what the leak says, which I know everybody is very interested in. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, Justice Alito writes in an initial majority draft circulated inside the court. A person familiar with the court's deliberations said that 4 of the other Republican-appointed justices, Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, had voted with Alito in the conference held among the justices after hearing oral arguments in December, and that the lineup remains unchanged as of this week. The 3 Democrat-appointed justices, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, are working on 1 or more dissents, according to the person. How Chief Justice Roberts will ultimately vote and whether he will join an already written opinion or draft his own is unclear. Well, if Alito's writing the opinion, then you pretty much got to figure that Roberts is not with it, because the Chief Justice assigns the opinion, makes the opinion assignment when he's in the majority. And if he's not in the majority, then the senior person from the others makes that decision. But anyhow, the document labeled as a first draft of the majority opinion includes a notation that it was circulated among the justices on February 10. If the draft If the Alito draft is adopted, it would rule in favor of Mississippi and in the closely watched case over that state's attempt to ban most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. A Supreme Court spokesperson declined to comment or make another representative of the court available to answer questions about the draft document, and I suspect they'll never comment on this. Politico received a copy of the draft opinion from a person familiar with the court proceedings in the Mississippi case, along with other details supporting the authenticity of the document. The draft opinion runs 98 pages, including a 31-page appendix of historical state abortion laws. The document is replete with citations to previous court decisions, books, and other authorities, and includes 118 footnotes. The appearances and timing of this draft are consistent with court practice. The disclosure of Alito's draft majority opinion, a rare breach of Supreme Court secrecy and traditions around its deliberations, comes as all sides in the abortion debate are girding for the ruling. Speculation about the looming decision has been intense since the December oral arguments indicated a majority was inclined to support the Mississippi law. Under long-standing court procedures, justices hold preliminary votes on cases shortly after argument and assign a member of the majority to write a draft of the court's opinion. Now, my understanding is that every Friday afternoon, the justices hold a conference. They've got a room specifically set up for that. Nobody ever gets to come into the room. The junior justice is the Tentago. If anybody needs coffee or anything like that, he trips out and gets it. Supreme Court justices all shake hands. Every justice shakes hands with every other justice before they begin their meeting on Friday afternoons in that conference. They decide then how they want it to go. They take a straw vote then and decide how they want it to go. And a member is assigned to write the majority of the draft. Now, if you read a book called The Brethren, which came out quite a while ago, at that time, and I suspect it hasn't changed, the drafts are circulated not online, not in emails, etc., but hard copy. That's a tremendous job for typing and I suppose Xeroxing now. But every little change gets circulated around, and every justice sees every draft. So the three in the minority also saw the Alito draft. The draft is often amended in consultation with other justices. Now, on that story, I've talked a little bit about how Brown versus Board was fixed. Justice Frankfurter and a guy named Ellman, who worked for the Justice Department, should have been disbarred. Frankfurter should have been impeached, and they probably both should have gone to jail because of the way they broke the rules of the Supreme Court. But this is highly unusual. But that story tells you how the draft of Brown versus Board was changed over and over again to get up to a 9-0 verdict. The first time around, Plessy versus Ferguson would have been sustained. But it took Justice Earl Warren to bring about the change. I'll get into that on the show one of these days. The Chief Justice typically assigns majority opinions when he's in the majority. But when he's not, that decision is typically made by the most senior justice in the minority. Exceptionally weak. A George Bush appointee who joined the court in 2006, Alito argues that the 1973 abortion rights ruling was ill-conceived and a deeply flawed decision that invented a right mentioned nowhere in the Constitution and unwisely sought to wrench the contentious issue away from the political branches of government. And I've commented on this before. Even pro-abortion folks say that the decision Roe versus Wade was a judicial abortion. Very poorly done. And students of government like me, who don't like to see critarchy, which means the rule of judges, would prefer that hard decisions like this that deal with people should be decided by the popular branches of the government, legislatures, state legislatures. And as I recall, even the incredible Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that Roe was decided too soon. Had it not been decided, it would have been worked out in the state legislatures and we wouldn't still be fighting about it. Good point. Alito's draft ruling would overturn a decision by the New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that found the Mississippi law ran afoul of Supreme Court precedent by seeking to effectively ban abortions before viability. Roe's survey of history ranged from the constitutionally irrelevant to the plainly incorrect, Alito continues, adding that its reasoning was exceptionally weak and that the original decision has had damaging consequences. And you know, you look at how we've been fighting over this for 50 years. I mean, even if you stood back and weren't concerned about killing babies in the womb and were only concerned about societal disruption, it has been an extremely disrupting decision. The inescapable conclusion is that a right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions, Alito writes. Alito approvingly quotes a broad range of critics of the Roe decision. He also points to liberal icons such as the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe, who at certain points in their careers took issue with the reasoning in Roe or its impact on the political process. Alito's skewering of Roe and the endorsement of at least 4 other justices for that unsparing critique is also a measure of the court's rightward turn in recent decades. Roe was decided 7-2 in 1973, with 5 Republican appointees joining 2 justices nominated by Democrat presidents. The overturning of Roe would almost immediately lead to stricter limits on abortion access in large swaths of the South and Midwest, with about half the states set to immediately impose broad abortion bans. Any state could legally allow the procedure. The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion, the draft concludes. Roe and Casey arrogated that authority. We now overrule those decisions and return that authority to the people and their elected representatives, which is what the lefties hate. The draft contains the type of caustic rhetorical flourishes Alito is known for and that caused Roberts, his fellow appointee, some discomfort in the past. At times, Alito's draft opinion takes an almost mocking tone as it skewers the majority opinion in Roe written by Justice Harry Blackmun, a Richard Nixon appointee who died in 1999. Now, an interesting tidbit here, both Blackmun and the Chief Justice at that time were from Minnesota, Warren Burger, and Harry Blackmun, both from Minnesota. People laughingly referred to them as the Minnesota Twins. Burger was much more successful in life, in practice, etc., in the Twin Cities even, than Blackmun was, and there were rumors that they were kind of jealous. So Blackmun wanted to do something really important and was able to wangle his way into writing the decision in Roe, which just about everybody said is a very poorly done decision. I suspect Berger probably told him that on their way back to the Twin Cities. Quote, Roe expressed the feeling that the 14th Amendment was the provision that did the work, but its message seemed to be that the abortion right could be found somewhere in the Constitution and that specifying its exact location was not of paramount importance. Now, of course, the somewhere in the Constitution is the constitutional right of privacy, which we've talked about before, and that constitutional right of privacy was found in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. And the Supreme Court in that case said that the right of privacy was in the penumbras and emanations of the Bill of Rights. Judicial hocus pocus at best. Alito declares that one of the central tenets of Roe, the, quote, viability distinction between fetuses not capable of living outside the womb and those which can, makes no sense. In several passages, he describes doctors and nurses who terminate pregnancies as abortionists. When Roberts voted with liberal jurists in 2020 to block a Louisiana law imposing heavier regulation on abortion clinics, his solo concurrence used the more neutral term abortion providers. Thank you, Chief Justice Roberts. In contrast, Justice Clarence Thomas used the word abortionist 25 times in a solo dissent in the same case. Thomas is my favorite by far. Alito's use of the phrase egregiously wrong to describe Roe echoes language Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart used in December in defending his state's ban on abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The phrase was also contained in an opinion Kavanaugh wrote as part of a 2020 ruling that jury convictions in criminal cases must be unanimous. In that opinion, Kavanaugh labeled two well-known Supreme Court decisions egregiously wrong when decided. The 1944 ruling upholding the detention of Japanese Americans during World War II, called Korematsu versus the United States, and the 1896 decision that blessed racial segregation under the rubric of separate but equal, Plessy versus Ferguson. The High Court has never formally overturned Korematsu, but did repudiate the decision in 2018 ruling by Roberts that then upheld President Donald Trump's travel ban policy. Plessy remained the law of the land for nearly 6 decades until the court overturned it with the Brown versus Board of Education school desegregation ruling in 1954. Quoting Kavanaugh, Alito writes of Plessy, it was egregiously wrong on the day it was decided. Alito's draft opinion includes in small type a list of about 2 pages worth of decisions in which the justices overruled prior precedents, in many instances reaching results praised by liberals. Okay, there's still a lot more to talk about here, but we're coming up to Churchill Downs, so I'm going to go to Churchill Downs, and when I come out of Churchill Downs, I'm going to entertain Frenchie on the Leak.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
We're already Pika's best radio station, but we're always looking for ways to be even better. Announcing The Point on Alexa. In addition to our FM and HD radio feeds, our incredible app, informative website, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live, you can now tell Alexa to stream The Point. And your smart speaker will start playing whatever we're saying. News and views 24/7 with your 4-word command. Alexa, stream The Point.
Frenchie, it looks like they need to hire a plumber over there at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, hello?
Frenchie, it looks like they need to hire a plumber over there at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, they have leaks. Actually, just before you went on the air at 4, I was watching Newsmax TV, and they were interviewing Dershowitz from who is kind of left-leaning, but on many issues he's kind of middle of the road now. I guess he's 84, so there is a generational gap. And he's very close to Roberts, because apparently Roberts was one of his students at Harvard. And what he was saying was that it's obvious that an intern who are all part of the board, and they are lawyers, even though they're interns, probably leak this and would become a hero in the left, and probably thought that it could influence one vote to not rule in favor to overturn Roe. And it was very interesting. He says Roberts already called the FBI, and the DOJ is also investigating the leak, and that when this person will be found, they will be disbarred. But he was also explaining that Roberts most likely will vote with the liberals on this, and but that Roe versus Wade is apparently going to be overturned. The leak, it's another black eye for Roberts, who has not been a very good Supreme Court person. His administration, he said it's probably one of the worst egregious leak that has happened in the history of the Supreme Court. And he was, he went in and said, well, while he is personally pro-abortion, he resented the way this was done, and it shows a lack of ethics from people that are interns at the Supreme Court, and that maybe they need to do some cleanup there. So it's very interesting to see a very liberal constitutionalist basically say that even though he disagrees with the upcoming ruling, that this was not the way to go about it. And he was trying to give some brownie points to Roberts, but basically said that this could be the end of Roberts as presiding over the Supreme Court. He might relinquish his title after all is done.
Wow, that's just like the Pope stepping aside. That's never happened before.
That has never happened, and he was obviously very furious about the process, and said that while he disagrees with the upcoming ruling, this is not the way to go about it. And he said, unfortunately, many people are now so radicalized that they find it that they can basically flaunt their oaths of office in order to make some political points. And I think he had a very good analysis regarding this. And of course, there will be a storm of controversy, but it looks like it will be a 5-4 vote. And Alito, according to him, Alito had laid out a bulletproof argument in favor to overturn the Roe versus Wade.
On Chief Justice Roberts, those who review it characterized him as an institutionalist, that they see many of his votes not so much dedicated to the merits of the case before them, but to make the Supreme Court look like what he wants it to look like, a nonpartisan.
Exactly.
And that's why he really was creative to uphold Obamacare.
He's very much along the line of another so-called conservative that was Kennedy. And Kennedy, if you remember the gay marriage things, he went out and concocted a whole argument for it that he took out of the air and used international law and all kind of other things that had nothing to do with the U.S. Constitution to bring it forward. But that's water under the bridge so far.
So as far as Roberts is concerned, ironically, his efforts to make the court look like it's nonpartisan and that you can't change every decision when the makeup of the court changes, that he's an institutionalist, it's working out exactly the opposite of what he wants it to. Yeah, he's coming out with a huge black eye out of the whole thing.
It's going to be a huge black eye, but apparently Dershowitz talked to him personally. They're fairly close. And Dershowitz kind of hinted that he is right now he's putting the whole Supreme Court upside down to try to find out who the leaker is, and he is really pissed off because he's going to look like the one that will be ultimately responsible for the leak will be Roberts because he allowed some people to not abide by their oath of office.
Now, you used the word intern when you first started talking about this. Did you mean intern or law clerk?
The law clerk, sorry.
Yeah.
And, thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
For the law clerks. And law clerks are officers of the court. And they take an oath. And they take a second oath to abide by the rules of the Supreme Court. And it's obvious that somebody didn't. And thought that they didn't like what was going to happen, and they're going to make a big deal out of it. So, but this is not surprising. We've seen it in the last 6 years with many people in the administration, in the executive, in the legislative, leaking things to bring a political narrative, and we see it here in the third body in the judiciary, and it is not good overall for the whole system that we have of check and balances.
Yeah, it's very disappointing.
And even though I don't agree with Dershowitz on many issues, I think his analysis was right on target, and we will see how that develops, but it's just a continuation of the lack of personal morals that some of those people in the different branch of the administrations have. This new generation of people that are willing to sacrifice the whole system for a few short-lived political gains.
Sounds like cultural Marxism again. Infiltrate the institutions and destroy them from within.
Destroy them from within. That's what he was saying. And, even though he might be a liberal, he still very much believes in the Constitution, and I think his analysis was right. And it would be interesting to see what Turley has to say about it.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait.
I'm sure he will put something tomorrow but it's going to create a storm, and in a way it might take away when the Supreme Court comes out officially with a verdict. It would not be that much of an issue anymore because the storm will have passed. Well,
maybe not.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think the left is going to use it as a fundraising, and trying to rally their troops for the midterms election. But we'll see.
Right.
So that was something I wanted to share because somehow he's been persona non grata on Fox and things. So now he's on Newsmax and.
Dershowitz kind of turned around after he stopped writing down to what was the name of the island with
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
The other Jewish guy.
Yeah.
That flew VIPs to his secret island.
Yeah.
I thought you meant riding in Broncos with.
The one that was suicide in New York.
Exactly, yeah. Epstein, yeah.
Epstein, yeah.
Yeah, according to the accounts, Dershowitz rode the Lolita Express with Epstein down to Epstein's Island.
At least twice.
Yeah.
But I think he's sick and tired of it. I wrote his book on the constitutionality and modern politics. It's quite interesting. He's denouncing a lot of that. He's also persona non grata, of course, at the New York Times and all those official mouthpiece
of
the system. Because if you go, even though you've been defending their point of view, if you go against them on one issue, they'll throw you under the bus.
That's it. Well, here we are, the end of the show. Good talking to you again, Frenchie. See you Monday. See you tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Okay, it's that time again for me to say, let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
A leak from the Supreme Court says a major decision is coming. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Quoting what they say is a leaked draft opinion, the website Politico reports Supreme Court justices have decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 ruling that legalized abortion in the U.S. Fox's chief Supreme Court correspondent Shannon Bream.
If this ends up being the opinion in some form or fashion, if it uses this wording, it's essentially sending the idea of abortion back to the states and saying they will decide, let the people there decide. It upholds the Mississippi law and says Roe and Casey got it completely wrong.
Shannon Bream points out this is only a draft dated in February and things could have changed since. It is not officially an opinion until it's published by the court. Fox News cannot independently confirm the draft is genuine, but several sources familiar with Justice Alito's writing say it appears to be legitimate. A spokesman for the high courts would not comment. A federal court jury in Washington has convicted New York City police veteran Thomas Webster on charges related to last year's incursion at the U.S. Capitol.
His case set precedents as being the first defendant tried for assault, as well as the first to use a self-defense argument, saying that he was trying to protect himself from what he called a rogue cop who started the confrontation by punching Webster in the face. The D.C. Metro officer, Noah Rathbun, testified he did not start the fight with Webster, who was initially indicted by a grand jury on counts including assault with a dangerous weapon, a metal flagpole.
Fox's Gernal Scott, Webster to be sentenced in September. A Philadelphia police officer has been charged with murder in the death of a 12-year-old boy who was shot in the back a month ago after firing a shot into an unmarked police car. Gains on Wall Street to start the new trading month. The Dow up 84 points, NASDAQ 201 points higher. The S&P 500 Monday adding 23 points. America is listening to Fox News.
Get all of your favorite Fox News podcasts ad-free on Apple Podcasts with Fox News Podcasts Plus. From Trey Gowdy, the Fox News Rundown, Will Kane, Brian Kilmeade, and so much more. Go to foxnewspodcasts.com for all the details. The Fox News Rundown, a contrast of perspectives you won't hear anywhere else. Your daily dose of news twice a day, featuring insight from top newsmakers, reporters, and Fox News contributors. Listen and subscribe now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. New. From the Fox News Podcasts Network, Dana Perino, co-host of the 5 and America's Newsroom on Fox News Channel, returns to the world of audio with a new limited-time podcast, Everything Will Be Okay with Dana Perino. Building off the success of her best-selling book of the same name, Dana provides an unequaled brand of advice built on real-life experience and interviews experts and individuals that make a difference in the lives of others. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's primary election day in Indiana and in Ohio today.
Ohio's Republican Senate primary will test the power of former President Trump's endorsement. He has backed author and venture capitalist J.D. Vance in a crowded Republican field. But former state treasurer Josh Mandel, former state Republican chair Jane Timken, and businessman Mike Gibbons have all campaigned as the most in line with Trump. State Senator Matt Dolan has distanced himself more than the others from the former president. The winner of the Republican primary is likely to face Democrat Congressman Tim Ryan in November in a general election to replace Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman, who is not running for re-election. In Washington, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
Well, Speaker Nancy Pelosi yesterday speaking about a Democratic congressional delegation's trip to Ukraine over the weekend.
Time is life. It is the sooner we can